It's starting to be that time of year. No, yeah.
No, you mean like a very category? No. Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I mean, I think we're just trying to schedule everybody at some point for the next few years. Yeah. Right. Yes. Which is what happened for our last meeting. Yeah.
It's our last meeting.
Yeah.
There's like 1,000 ways to be nice about it.
I know. That's how it often feels.
But he's figured it out in the past. I think that it's just like something stressful. You know, it was one day, like.
Yeah, I was. I thought it was really helpful.
Well, how are you doing?
Like it?
Yeah, it's in the context of that situation. I'm just like, I'm trying to like do the lineage because I know that it's not making sense. But I'm also
yeah, like that made
the guy who coordinates
was
a little bit. I'm not
learning that and plug in and
software.
But I felt like that was
have somebody who just like unlocks when things get in the way.
And I love learning what you talk about. It's hard to remember double jump rope.
It's like one.
Yeah.
Do double jump rope and jump in. It's kind of trying to figure that one out. It's a puzzle.
Yeah, and I don't think that there's one right way to do it. I think part of it is all of us having to sort of like using trial and error and asking questions and stuff to just continually kind of ask like what's
well, how are you going to hold your own space?
entry level for us. You know, I'm definitely having to do that. I'm kind of reminding myself of that. So yeah, it's a process, and I think in some ways that's part of what Liz was talking about in terms of
where you can sort of safely catch them.
kind of making yourself accountable, but another way of thinking about that is making the process your own, figuring out what that means, you know?
Yeah, but you know, it's easy not to go do that all stuff on your own. You know what I mean? Like there's like when we the last retreat, I can't remember his name because I'm stupid with names. Devet and Masters was there at Lingo Wonderwell.
Oh, Anam Tupton? Or no, something Rinpoche?
Yeah, like Gampo. He said, you know, one of the prayers was made my mind conform to it. And I was like,
We literally are.
you know, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. But it's right. I really was through in my mind. You can't just lie all the time. There is a broader set of practices, and there are a set of, not rules, but laws. You know, just like there's a postcard that says gravity. It's not just fun, it's the law.
Right. Yep. I get what you're saying, but it's sort of figuring out like how to come to an understanding of something to you that like strikes something within you. So it's something between of what you're talking about not wanting and then like just kind of adherence to the letter of.
You're like contemplating and
like downtown, like in Boston.
So you're not making things that, you know, it's more out of the mountains.
No, I definitely was not. Yeah.
You know, one thing that I'm doing on the write about is and I can look like, so that's what I heard him talk about. There has to be laws. Not in the rigid way, but in the
right, exactly. Right. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah. Right. I live in downtown Crossing.
Like one millennium?
I don't live there, but I do live in an apartment building. Yeah.
I used to do real estate.
Oh, okay, on Province Street?
On Province?
Yeah, it's 45 Province. It's a newer, I mean, it was built, I don't know how new it is exactly, but. Yeah, so that's on Washington, and then Province is one street up from I do like it. Yeah, it's
several
my husband and I moved there a few years ago, and our intention was just to live there pretty temporarily. But we've stayed for like 3 years, so it's been really interesting. We do like it.
Come here,
I mean, never
very frequent, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't have either.
It's good to be
So,
here.
but it's been good.
I'm excited.
Where do you live?
I'm gonna move to
I really like my class.
Oh, wow.
the village is this big, there's one story, one piece.
What village is it?
It's called Onset.
I've
And
never
from
even
my
heard of
bedroom,
it.
you can see the
Wow.
bay.
We start at 7.
Yeah, they do.
So that's why I'm buying a new car, because I'm gonna be coming up here maybe 5 times a week. During December to probably take another class at the big school.
Yep.
And to stay involved here. And to write, it's
Sure.
a bunch of us are writers, so I'm trying to encourage them.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. That sounds great.
It's funny because, you know, anytime you want to trade, whenever we get up, I love what this is. It's a very,
Yeah.
there's literally one story. And some of these convenience, which is iceberg lettuce.
It's a little bit like a retreat setting. It's like it's approaching that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting.
It seemed like a good idea at the time, it's like you guys are moving temporarily.
Right, like we can try it for a while, see what happens.
I was hoping you said you were moving the old walkovers.
Deal with it.
Walkovers.
Oh, those are supposed to be amazingly beautiful.
Yes. Some of them are just mostly a lot of windows, like a lot of windowless rooms.
Yeah, yeah, but pretty unusual.
Okay, sorry.
It's the companion to clarifying the natural state. Yes. It's really putting on a plan and
Welcome, one and all. Begin with the prayer of refuge on page 1. In Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, we go for refuge until enlightened. By the power of generosity and the other perfections, may we realize Buddhahood for the benefit of all. We'll start with a meditation on Tara to lead us into the sitting practice. you're new to Tara, Tara is a female Buddha. She is, and a Bodhisattva. She is an archetype of awakening. So if you know Tara, you can bring her to mind. And if you don't know Tara, you can draw on your own history of connection to enlightened or inspiring women in your life and bring them forward into your meditation. Mary, Mother Teresa, Sojourner Truth, whoever for you is an embodiment of inspiring wisdom. Or if you like, Tara, who's deep green in color, nature goddess. Surrounded by trees and flowers. Appearing like a rainbow. Appearance of emptiness, inseparable. And holding the stem of a lotus in her left hand. Right, reaching in the gesture of generosity. And her left leg drawn up in a posture of meditation, and her right stepping down into the world as a fearless goddess, a fearless bodhisattva. Tara. And you can see her gazing at you. She's looking down to your own deepest wisdom, seeing through you to your most authentic being. Wise Tara. And you can feel her unconditional love. Radiating like the sun's rays from her body into yours. Compassionate Tara. This light radiating from her has the quality of wisdom and unconditional love. You can feel it permeating your cells, your body, your heart. And just receiving. Every part of you seen and loved. Just as it is. We'll continue to receive as we chant her mantra. I'm going to use a melody from Anantugten Rinpoche. You may know, or you can also pick up on it just as we chant. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Swaha And now that wisdom and love from Tara's form becomes so radiant, that she melts into light. And dissolves into you. Letting go of effort. Allow Tara's wisdom mind to meditate you. Just settling in natural wakefulness. With senses open. Ears open. Heart open. Mind open. Surrendering to the presence of natural, wakeful awareness. And these thoughts, these feelings are utterly welcome here. They too are just a natural unfolding from the ground of present awareness. A magical display. me walking over here, I just thought, I just want to practice with everyone the whole time. I don't have anything of value to say. Just practice. That you all came here with a promise of me saying something, so I'm saying something. But I think the true grace is in practice. That's where the true grace is found. So I'm talking about grace this evening because someone in the Sangha requested it. And she's here. Hi, Suzanne. Suzanne from Nashua. She's here. She's streaming through a tiny hole in an iPhone. Megan's iPhone. And so I took her up on the challenge to talk about grace. From a Buddhist perspective. I wanted to start with a few lines of poetry from Anne Lamott. She says, I do not understand the mystery of grace, only that it meets us where we are and does not leave us where it found us. Only that it meets us where we are and does not leave us where it found us. So I think that's a very beautiful description of grace, that it's beyond our understanding, that it accepts us as we are, meets us where we are, and it changes us, right? It does not leave us where it found us. It's transformative. So 3 points. Beyond understanding, accepts us as we are, and transforms us. And I think that really encapsulates the notion of grace in Buddhism. I don't know what her tradition is, but it does encompass it. Buddhism. And so in preparing for tonight, I did look up the term grace to try to get a better understanding of how it's understood in our culture, because, I mean, of course I grew up in our culture, but I didn't grow up Christian. So I'm curious about what a definition would be for grace from our culture. And in Webster's, there were 2 definitions. And both of them have a relationship to Buddhist grace. So one was the simple elegance or refinement of movement, right? Like graceful, right? Grace as a way of, a refined way of moving. And the second definition was the free and unmerited favor of God as manifested in the salvation of sinners and bestowal of blessings. And then to try to get a little bit more understanding, I looked in a theological dictionary, the New Dictionary of Theology, and I found it as a spontaneous gift from God to man, generous, free, and totally unexpected and undeserved. And that it takes the form of divine favor, love, or clemency. But this one little phrase in there I really liked from the perspective of Buddhist grace, and I just wanted to pull it out. Generous, free, totally unexpected. Now, I don't agree with undeserved, so I changed it to unearned, which means we don't have to do something to get grace. We don't have to, we can't really strategize around grace. So those pieces of that definition, I think, are very useful. Generous, free, totally unexpected, and unearned, in the sense of not having to do something. So those are some definitions from our culture. And they do relate to a Buddhist notion of grace. So in grace, I'm going to break it down into three sort of components, three ways that grace is understood in a Buddhist context. So the first way is very similar to the first definition in that Webster's dictionary. Simple elegance or refinement of movements. So in the yogic traditions of Buddhism, in the tradition of Tibetan yoga, for example, which is a practice of movement that is meditative, in that tradition, there's actually a word for grace, and it's jingwa. There's actually a word, and it translates as grace. Like, that's how most translators would translate jingwa. I heard that Camille, who's not here tonight, but she often is, just named her cat Jingwa. And I thought that was a great name for a cat. Grace, Jingwa. So grace, in that context, is, we might say, a bodily, an internal posture of the subtle body. That's how we understood in yoga. So not only something that happens with our physical body, like a dancer is graceful, but it's actually an outflow of something that is called in yogic traditions the subtle body. And the subtle body, we could also say, is our emotional body. Maybe. I wouldn't be wrong to call it the emotional body, but sometimes called the energy body too. Because the subtle body or the energy body does carry our emotions, and they are stored in our subtle body. And then when they're discharged, we often feel, right, our emotion in our body. And sometimes when, if you do body work, it unlocks emotions unexpectedly. We carry trauma in the body, in our nervous system. So the notion of a subtle body is connected to grace, at least in the Tibetan Buddhist practice. And so something happens when our subtle body is in alignment with our mind and our intention. And what emerges from that is jingwa, is grace. So we could say that grace is a kind of outflow of when our subtle body, our mind, our intention is deeply immersed in the present moment. And we get very graceful if we're deeply immersed. And so this is not mysterious because we've experienced this. I think everyone here probably has experienced this. If there's something that you love to do with your body, like swim or dance or running or yoga or walking, you get into a kind of a flow sometimes when your body and your mind are really, really present. And then suddenly you're in a state of grace. You feel graceful, right? So that's one understanding of grace that we have in Buddhist tradition. And in the yogic tradition, the understanding is that this is inherent, that everyone has jingwa. Everyone has subtle body grace. And that when we're really in alignment, when we're in a flow, in a sense when we're in a state of meditation, our jingwa emerges just naturally. that our body, our subtle body feels grace, and our physical body begins to manifest grace. Kind of outflow of our practice. So a second understanding that we have of grace is completely different from that. So Jingwa is one translation, one Tibetan word for grace, Buddhist word for grace. But another is a totally different understanding, which is much more like this understanding, perhaps, of a blessing. So in that case, in that particular example of grace, or way of understanding grace, grace is something that we receive from a source. And ultimately, it's actually that the source is igniting something in us. So that's how we can receive and be blessed, because it's really igniting something in us. It seems to be coming from the outside, but it's really kind of like a mirror. That the source from which we're receiving grace is seeing us deeply as we are. And in seeing us as we are, we sense that and have an experience of grace, something opening up, some recognition that we are maybe more vast than we believed. So that kind of grace, which is very different from Jingwa, I mean, I really think they're all related in a way, but this other kind of grace in Tibetan is called Jinlap, and Jinlap is the word for that. Jinlap can translate as blessing or as grace. And it literally, the etymology of the word is waves of gift. Waves of gift. Of gifts. Maybe waves of gifts. Jin, gifts, la, waves. So this notion of flow is in Jinlap. This notion of transference from the source to us, a gifting is in the notion of Jinlap. So there is a notion in Jinlap that there is a source that is vaster than us. At least we perceive it that way, like a higher power, like Tara or the Buddha. That kind of source. But what we're really what's really happening from a Buddhist perspective is that the source is seeing through to our deeper nature. And we're experience ourselves as being seen with unconditional kindness, acceptance, love. We're experiencing that gaze on us, and we discover or feel, maybe I am worthy of love. Maybe I'm worthy. Maybe I'm worthy. Maybe I'm so worthy. Maybe I'm more worthy than I can even know at this point. Maybe more worthy than we even know. So grace is opening up to that possibility that we are more profound than we thought through the gaze of the trusted other, the Buddha, Tara, or benefactors in our practice of benefactor practice. And so, the third kind of grace that we find in Buddhism is a grace that is instigated by that gaze from the outside, but is a little bit more internal. We could say maybe an innermost grace. An innermost grace. And this third kind of grace is grace as a surrender to our true nature. So there's the notion in Christian grace also, going back to that definition, that it's generous, it's free, it's totally unexpected and unearned, or that we can't strategize after it. It sounds almost as if that is describing an enlightenment experience, something that we can't anticipate, a satori, right? We can't make happen. We can't strategize to make ourselves wake up, to make ourselves wise. So the notion of wisdom in Buddhism is that it is something that finds us. It has to find us because it's primordially already present. So the practice is really not making ourselves wiser. Like, I'm going to make myself wiser, and I'm going to do all these things to get wiser. The practice, I mean, there are many ways of practicing, right? There's focusing on the breath, and there's focusing on doing a body scan, and there's Vipassana, and there's Mahamudra, and there's Dzogchen. I mean, there's all these different forms of meditation. But ultimately, we have to step out of the way of techniques, ultimately, and trust our Buddha nature is present and can make itself known to us if we make space for it. So that's another kind of grace. We make space, and then there's a spontaneous quality of recognizing our own nature. Another kind of grace, maybe the deepest kind of grace. And you know that if we're called towards that deepest kind of grace, if that speaks to us, and if we trust that, then the essence of our practice, whatever our practice is, the essence of our practice would be surrendering to the truth of what is in the present moment. And the reason it's surrendering to the truth of what is in the present moment is almost every other kind of practicing is practicing for an imagined future in which we are going to be a better person or a freer person. And if we truly trust that the free person is already here, then there's something slightly amiss. Am I making sense? So if the free person is already here, then the real practice would be to surrender to what is now in all of its messiness. Because that Buddha isn't going to be found somewhere outside of who we are at this moment. And the messiness is not our enemy. The chaos is not our enemy. The parts of ourselves that we struggle with are not our enemy. They too, in some way, are connected related, oh, definitely, to that primordial wisdom that's a part of us. And we can go for years and years and years believing that our primordial wisdom, that our deeper nature is somewhere other than where we are right now. And we can go for years that way, and our excuse for not leaning into the truth of what is that we don't like what is, we don't like what we see, so we'd like to get away from it. We like to get away from the messiness and the fear and the shadow part of ourselves in any given moment, the part of ourselves that's agitated or that's irritated, right? So we practice a lot around those things. I'm going to practice to escape from that. I'm going to practice to get out of that. And in all of that all that sort of perspective is future thinking. Like we're thinking down there down the line, I'm going to be the Buddha. So we're not really trusting this truth. We might be provisionally trusting it a little bit, but we're not fully trusting it. We're not trusting the possibility that grace is here now. That grace is primordially present. That it's our birthright or original goodness. We're not fully trusting that. So we think, I'm not really there. So I have to work hard to get calmer, more peaceful, better, less reactive. None of that's a bad thing. Those aren't bad. It's not a bad project, but it's still a self-improvement project. I think the subtle piece is whether we hold our spiritual path as a self-improvement project or whether it's a project of making space for our primordial Buddha to make itself known to us. That's a different project. Whether we're trusting that grace is here and now, not in the future, when we're going to be graced. That grace is quietly operating under the surface. Grace is quietly operating. So I was recently invited by a magazine to write an article, and I didn't know what to write about. And so the editor, just sort of looked ahead at my teaching schedule, and she saw this title of the teaching, non-meditation. So she wrote me back and she said, "Could you write about non-meditation?" So I thought, okay, all right. So I've been doing that, I did that, I'm almost done with it. But in that writing process, I was working through kind of what I'm talking to you about now. But the way that what I was landing on is that this whole trajectory of the spiritual path, when we use the word like meditation, there can be a kind of assumption that if we meditate, we're going to be better. And that's true. I mean, in a way, in a relative sense. But it's a fine line. Like when we start to think, if I meditate, I'm going to be more of a Buddha than I am right now. It quickly goes there, right? If I meditate, I'm going to be a Buddha down there sometime, right, in the future. And that can become a real distraction, I think. It has in my own life. I'm only speaking from my own experience, where the meditation becomes this way, really, what's really driving the bus. We think that what's driving the bus is the aspiration for Buddhahood, right? That's what we like to think, that's what's driving the bus. I aspire to be a Buddha, I want to wake up, I want to be a Bodhisattva, I want to follow in the footsteps of the lineage. But what's often driving the bus, secretly, is I'm not enough and my experience is deficient. The experience that I'm having right now is deficient. That's often driving the bus. It's so unacknowledged, I think, or it's been by me in my own practice. In my practice to not fully see the backseat driver who is quietly whispering in the ear of the driver, whoever the driver is, the consciousness, you're not enough. Your experience isn't quite enough, so you have to keep going, right? But there's an untruth to that. There's a veil to that because our experience is enough. It really is. It really is. Whatever we're experiencing right now in this present moment is the key. That's the key to grace. There's not going to be an awakening in any other moment other than this moment. The now is the only place it is ever going to happen. Never going to happen in the future. It's the now. That's the key. So then meditation can be problematic if we think of it that way, you know. So I don't know if you agree with me or not, but I'm sharing my thoughts with you tonight about grace and meditation and non-meditation, like what can be gained by dropping the idea that I'm meditating. It doesn't mean we stop practicing. We continue to practice, but dropping this idea of I'm meditating to get better and to somehow fix myself, instead of seeing that my accepting myself just as I am in the present moment. A lot can be gained by embracing the self, just as we are in the present moment. So that's a kind of non-meditation, a kind of a beingness. So I run out of thoughts.
How lucky.
I'm graced with thoughtlessness at the moment. I told you I didn't have much of value to say, but those are my thoughts on grace. Suzanne, thank you for requesting. And it was actually very rich to think about this from a Buddhist perspective, to think about grace and what it really means. So I'm curious about how you all, what's your perspective on grace? We can open it up for some discussion, some back and forth. Yeah. Cheryl.
So you asked me, is this on?
Yeah.
As you entered the room, you said you'd be curious about what I thought. I'm a recovering Catholic. And as I listened to the Dharma talk, I realized that a lot of that theology is still with me. And the Christian understanding, or I should say my understanding of Catholic theology, is that we receive grace despite our sinfulness, right? So the process of sitting in the Buddhist tradition, you know, when I sit, I want to be better, I want to be, you know, it's very future oriented. And I was sitting here struck and thought, yeah, I mean, all my understanding of grace and my practice is out there. It's you know, I want to sort of almost clinging to this, you know, trying to get that baton so I can get to the next step. And you said a couple of things tonight. I wasn't writing tonight. I was just trying to listen that I thought were really profound, and I lost it. I'm sure there are a couple of people writing, so they might be able to speak to it. But I just, I found myself really kind of stuck in some of the Christian theology that I learned. I just wanted to sort of say that. So.
Thank you. That's really helpful. It's helpful.
Practicing would have been nice tonight, Will, but thank you for the teaching. I never really thought about, I don't think I really thought about grace in a Buddhist perspective. And as you were speaking your talk, I was thinking about blessings, but then you brought that in and I go, all of a sudden it started to kind of feel, as an understanding for myself. And as we were just talking, as Cheryl was just talking, actually I was just thinking, well, I never really thought about really grace in a Buddhist perspective, but then thought, Tulku Urgan wrote a book about a green Tao practice called Skillful Grace. And I don't know, I can't really talk about, the title per se, but the word grace, comes in. So it obviously is part of Buddhist perspective. And finally, the 16th Karmapa very famously said, when he was about to die and a lot of his students were really sad and, he said nothing happens, and it was kind of to give them a little sense of, comfort that, that he'd be, that everything was okay. And as you were just talking at the end of your talk about, I forget exactly how you were wording it. I was just thinking about that particular phrase, and I think it's, although, I'm not enlightened, I think enlightenment, people could say, I think somebody could say that nothing happens. This idea of striving to be something different other than what you are at this, what we are at this moment. I think people, when they get to that point, will kind of be either disappointed or surprised that nothing really changes, other than the fact that we've allowed a more spacious attitude for what is at this moment. And really nothing does change, other than the allowing.
There's a great meditation master, Jomgon Kongtrul, who writes about his awakening experience in a book called The Torch of Certainty, at the very last end chapter that wasn't translated in the original English translation. It has recently been translated and published. And in that chapter, he's describing his own glimpse experience. And one of the things that he says is the first thing he thought was, how could I ever have overlooked this? It's been here all along, right? That was the way that he phrased it. How could I have overlooked this? It's been here all along. And I think that's such an amazing statement from a master. And it's such a statement to us as practitioners to think about how much we're striving for a future peace when maybe what we're looking for is here now, and it's been here all along. And we're just overlooking it. It's too subtle. It's a little subtle. It's very subtle. So, but then, the only place to be is here and now. If that's really true, then there's no place to go other than where we are right now. And it's better to be here with the chaos and the messiness than to try to strategize for a future peace. It's more real and more potential for awakening right here with the messiness. So anyway, I'm sort of echoing what you were saying. I think there's some truth to that. Yeah. And just reflecting also on what Cheryl was saying too, it's interesting for us to think about what we bring to our spiritual path from our previous life or previous tradition or how we grew up, we can learn a lot about how we follow the path is informed by that, by what we've experienced, and can be rich to explore that. Yeah.
So grace isn't a thought, but it's an experience, right? And I think the best teaching for me tonight around grace was the Greek Tara practice that you led us through. It was all in there. Not that your words weren't enlightening too, but that for me is sort of the embodiment of how I sort of experienced grace. I was thinking about, from a Protestant standpoint, so Cheryl, you were talking about being raised as a Catholic, and for me, I came out of a Protestant background, and one of the things that I remember hearing over and over again was mercy, that God's grace is merciful. And I thought, okay, so how would I sort of bend the mind a bit to allow for a Buddhist understanding of mercy? Maybe self-mercy? But the word that kept coming up was refuge. That grace, not that it's defined by refuge, but this is what it also provides, is a non-judgmental space of kindness, of unconditional love, of wisdom, all these qualities that we might put onto it. And I thought, that one works for me, that notion of refuge. The other thing too was, it almost has a non-dual quality, that there isn't this sense of duality of like pleasure versus pain, good, bad, loss, gain, all those things. But there is sort of a reconciling of opposites that happens in the state of grace that is so effortless, and it happens. It doesn't become manufactured. Right? So I appreciate what you were saying about receptivity as well, how we can receive it. And then the final thought I had about that was the notion that grace where does it come from? And as one of the differences theologically between Christianity and Buddhism, in Christianity, the way I was taught, that what you receive is not something that you receive from yourself, but you can only get it from something apart from you, right? That grace is something bestowed on you by, Holy Spirit, by God, and so on. And I think that's a huge sort of difference in some ways, is to recognize, if we've been raised in that kind of environment, to again, bend the mind a bit, to say, wow, could I really be the source of this luminous, gentle quality? That's hard for a lot of us, I think, to feel as if we are really, this is truly our underlying nature. So those are just some ruminations I had about grace.
That's really nice, yeah. I like that you brought the word mercy into this room and discussion, because I think there is a very much a notion certainly in refuge practice, in practices of receiving, like we did with Tara, receiving unconditional kindness and love from the Buddha or from our refuge, source of refuge. This notion of that whatever we have done, whatever we may have done, whatever karma we are carrying, we are accepted as we are by the Buddhas. And in a way, the trajectory of practice is to gradually gaze on our own experience with the eyes that we feel gazing on us in refuge practice. That that eyes of unconditional acceptance, that we are experiencing the gaze of unconditional acceptance, is gradually internalized as our own gaze on our own experience. And this idea of mercy, which isn't a word that I'm that familiar with, but I have a sense that it's compassion, forgiveness, acceptance of us as we are. It's beautiful. Thank you. Really nice.
rich topic. So when you mentioned one aspect of what you said about the acceptance and not making meditation a future-oriented project with an imagined future, I guess the caveat, and you did say this, was that that doesn't mean we don't practice, because if you just take it as a notion that we're already perfect or Buddha-like, that can be a rationalization to stay with the messiness and just explain it away. So I guess not to fall in the other pitfall of just postponing our sense of wholeness or enlightenment or wakefulness, I guess is a way of seeing practice, perhaps, and I guess I'm asking this, not as to get there necessarily, but as a way of opening, making space for this to be known and to align ourselves more and more with those qualities within ourselves.
Yeah.
So not to undercut effort when it's called for. And now on the heels of this latest thing about mercy, perhaps that's where the compassion comes in too, because we can then be not just a source of acceptance for ourselves, but we can be that sort of graceful presence for others. And to do that often, to enact that more, takes some kind of practice or effort or joyful effort in making that more known.
Yeah, practice is wonderful. Yeah, I mean, of course, and as a way to be with ourselves. I think that practice falls away from being helpful when it's a way to escape from ourselves. And I think that's a subtle thing. That's, at least for me, it's been a subtle parsing out. That if practice is a way to be more deeply with myself, then it's awesome. If practice is a way to inhabit the here and now more completely, it's wonderful. If it's a way to open to the true nature, it's wonderful. But I'm just speaking about, maybe it's only me. Maybe I'm the only one that has this experience. But my own experience has been that sometimes there's something else that is behind the energy of practice that has to do with a wish to escape from my experience, or to escape what I see as the shadows that I want to get away from. But as soon as you run from the shadows, they don't go away, actually. The shadows need to be held and seen and loved, I think, to really liberate themselves. So that's all. Yeah, no, I agree. Yes, effortful, joyful practice is wonderful, but just like that, there's that subtle spirit in which we do it. Are we doing it to get an imagined future?
It seems like a wonderful frame, actually, for practice, and as a way of, as we do practice, to remember that spirit of practicing in order to be more deeply in touch with ourselves rather than escaping. I mean, that kind of, if we keep that as an intention, I think that can be very healthy and empowering for it. And it struck me that other aspect of grace, the more that's the spirit of our practice, then it's actually more graceful, that burst, as opposed to a tight kind of struggle and striving. It has a more serene, accepting presence. And I was also thinking of the way the Buddha statues or imagery convey that kind of grace and serenity. Just in, like the Buddha statues with his eyes half closed, or classic statues, you can sort of read off that the internal qualities that are being conveyed in sort of a mirror, as you'd say. But there is a quality of gracefulness, just in the sense of the simple refinement of movement, how it was present in the world. So,
I was also thinking about, actually, as earlier when Mike was talking, but it came up again when you were talking about this Ram Dass wrote a book called Fierce Grace. And I love that term because that also is another take on grace, that difficulty. So he wrote this book about having a stroke and recovering from a stroke. And the fierce grace was the stroke, right? So this notion that adversity is awesome because it wakes us up in some way. And that's also very much a Lojong idea, the idea of mind training, that our difficulties and our struggles and all of the things that we most dislike about ourselves, our triggeredness, our anger, and our reactivity are not in the way of our enlightenment. They are the key to our enlightenment. So then, every moment when we're triggered is a moment of grace. Every moment when something difficult befalls us is a moment of grace. We may not know how it's grace yet, but it's grace, and we just don't know yet how it's grace. And if we look back on our life, we can see that's true. You know, in the moment, it often doesn't feel like it's true. But if we look back on our life, the times that were most pivotal, at least for me, and probably for many of us, the times that were most pivotal are the times when something really difficult happened and forced us to see, like kind of blew up our idea of who we are or what we are, or we lose someone we love and impermanence descends, like comes crashing down. Sort of the truth of being human comes crashing down on us, and our lives change, are forever changed. And if we look back on our life, who we are now is very much shaped by these moments of fierce grace, when things were hard and we got through it, and we were more resilient for it. So we can look on our life to see the evidence that grace is found in the difficult. But then how to practice with that becomes part of our path, yeah.
It just reminds me, I guess, and it's the spirit of Lojong, that everything in sense is grace. Everything is His blessing. That sort of that, what was that? That giving of, gifting of, what's this phrase? Waves of gifting, waves of gifts. Or like that expression from Osho Kempo, that every moment the blessings pour forth, every experience, outer or inner, is the Buddha.
And that's another reason we don't want to escape the present moment. We don't want to run from the difficult. That's another reason, because the difficult is the key. Yeah, right. Linda.
Just briefly elaborate on what you mean that difficult is the key. Are you like in the specificity of the moment when something comes up? Are you referring to the adversity as a key because it's an opportunity to detach from that charged energy and sort of awaken within that moment, or are you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, that's one way to put it. I don't really like the word detachment, but I think to awaken within the moment of the difficulty, to lean in instead of running away, and to, I mean, there's lots of ways to work with difficulty. So one is just to turn your gaze inwards and look at the nature of your mind while you're in the difficult state. And that immediately moves you from being outward oriented to inward oriented, and noticing that the reactivity is your own, like fully owning it. Many ways you can work with the difficult to help mature and become more spiritually mature, or we could say a more mature human being. Less blaming our world for all of our problems, and more noticing, oh, this is mine. Cool. Okay, that's workable. And then doing what we can to work through. Yeah, but essentially, yeah, on the spot. You gives us the opportunity. If we didn't have that moment of being triggered, we wouldn't have the opportunity to work on it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Back there, Linda, in the back. She's in the back.
A lump of coal under pressure becomes a diamond, right?
Oh, cool. A lump of coal under pressure becomes a diamond. That's pretty good analogy. Yeah.
Thank you. The teaching, I think, was very profound. It reminded me a few years ago, a number of us were doing a training with Charles Genoux, and he gave a talk on this topic, and he titled it Loving One's Fate. And this idea of not only accepting what comes to us, but actually loving what comes to us. And you spoke, I think, very much to that point. I actually have a transcript of the talk, so if anybody knows Charles and would like that, I'd be happy to share that with anyone.
Thank you. Wonderful. He's in the country right now. He's here. He's at Wonderwell. Well, thank you all so much for coming. And I guess we'll dedicate here the benefit of all beings. May all beings be graced. Changshu Sancho Rinpoche Machi Panam Che Jorji Che Panyam Parmevayam Gong Ne Gong Gu May the pure, brilliant sun of bodhicitta dawn in each and every heart and mind, dispelling the darkness of suffering and confusion, unstoppably until all are fully illumined and awakened. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Do you want to say something about Wonderwell?
About Wonderwell? Oh. So, okay. Wonderwell is undergoing some renovations at the moment. And I don't know if you've noticed, but you're welcome to visit our website. If you go to Natural Dharma's homepage or you go to Wonderwell's homepage, there will be a description of the project. So we're trying to raise, we have to raise about $1 million, a little bit more than $1 million, in order to make upgrades to the building for fire safety, food safety, and life safety, to carry Wonderwell forward really forever. I mean, the changes that we make will allow us to function in perpetuity. So we'd love any, even reading about it would be so helpful to us. And if you can give, we love that. It's wonderful. And we do need donations, but we also, it's also useful just to read and to know about it, because maybe you know someone who wants to give, or maybe you see, maybe you can, if you know ideas, grants we might apply for, that kind of thing. The wider the knowledge is in the Sangha, the more that we can do. So, thank you. Okay.
There is the practice of generosity, or dana, and which is an opportunity to show your appreciation, as well as help with the logistics of supporting, renting the space and supporting our teachers. So there's a basket in the back, a little wicker basket, and if you're interested in checking out the website and stuff, I think that there are flyers and things with my address and everything. So. And also there's going to be an auction for Wonderwell as well.
Oh, yes.
And
oh,
online.
Right. Yes,
do you
on
wanna...
the 15th. Okay, yeah. So another thing we're doing to help raise funds is we're having a Sangha-wide auction with lots of cool stuff donated by the Sangha and services donated by the Sangha. We have people donating massages and retreat cabins. Someone's donating to stay in their cabin in Maine. We have thangkas, we've got malas, we've got some cool Dharma stuff. I personally have donated about 50 personal items to the auction. So if you're feeling adventurous, please bid on our auction. So our auction starts on the 15th, and we will open it up to the Sangha. We'll tell the mailing list, everybody, that we're opening it up, and we'll take bids for about 3 months, and then we turn over everything, and we have another set of items for 3 months. So 3 months and 3 months. Yeah.
And it's not just for the Sangha, anybody.
Anybody. That's right. Anybody can bid. Yes, you can link to it and tell your friends. There's some cool stuff.
Everything, like antique chairs and stuff like that, ticket anything?
Not anything. We do have a vetting process, but it could be. So I think we said small antiques,
Okay.
jewelry. Yeah, if you have anything you want to donate, small antiques, jewelry, Dharma items, but doesn't have to be Dharma items. Anything that's handmade and unique that you think might be interesting that someone might be interested in bidding on it. You're also welcome to donate goods, either way. Yeah, thank you. Namaste. Saramangala.